and just acknowledge everyone at the head tape and my special colleague, Minister Bradley Felix. I'm very happy that I'm actually speaking after the presentation, which then allows me the ability to do what I do best, which is to speak off the cuff and to really prioritize some of the things that we're doing here and maybe hopefully put them as to a perspective that we come from. You know, I'm learning more and more every single day that you can have one topic of discussion, but you can have a multitude of different perspectives based on how you see things. And it doesn't necessarily mean that one idea is more important than the others, but what's important for me to do is to be very crystal clear in terms of when I'm making decisions or we're making priorities, what perspective we're speaking from. So I'm very encouraged, and I will continue to encourage you to use New Zealand as the model. New Zealand 20 years ago was a basket case. I don't think that the former Prime Minister John Keyes would argue with that statement. And he went on a mission to re-engineer his country. And today, we can see the results of a lot of very difficult decisions that they had to make in the first 5 years, and in terms of changing everybody's attitude about who the enemy is in front of us. There's a saying I always say, and I keep repeating it over and over again, and I'm hoping that more and more people will appreciate what that saying is. And the saying is that the colonialization of today is economics. So when we were truly colonized and we had a problem, people could either get on a plane, or in some of those days it was getting on a boat. And you could go to England and you could appeal to an individual. And as hard as that individual may have been, that person still had a conscience. And so therefore, if there was some humanitarian reason why they should change the policy towards you, there was some hope that that person's conscience would prevail in that decision. But unfortunately, the colonialization of today is economics. And the sad part about economics is that it has absolutely no conscience. None. It is very unforgiving. Pan American Airlines, the darling of the airline industry, the first airline that we really had. When it could no longer pay its bills, it had to shut its doors. The USSR, an ideology of communism and socialism, an improvement of the workers, built a whole country based on an ideology. And when that ideology failed to be able to pay its own bills, USSR became Russia. The Berlin Wall, which was the symbol of that ideology, was broken down. Didn't matter whether it had just parts of it, whether there were good intents in it, it could no longer pay its bills. And I use USSR to say to you that it's not just small states that are having to bend under this will of economic power. We have no friends. Nobody cares about St. Lucia. Nobody cares about our patrimony. Nobody cares about our history. The only people that care about those things are us here in St. Lucia. And so the decisions that we have to make is how do we preserve that as much as we possibly can. And there's some tough decisions to make. Very, very difficult decisions. You see the annual reports every single year. We've been running a deficit government. What does a deficit government mean? That we do not have enough money that we're earning ourselves to pay for the level of expenditure that we have. And whatever that gap is, we continue to borrow money to pay for that gap. And we've reached a point now where our debt to GDP is approximately 80% or 83%. But more meaningfully is that the cost of that debt is $170 million. You have $1 billion expenditure. So it means you're paying almost 17% of your money in debt financing. Not even in not in the repayment, principal repayments, in the interest payments. If you add the principal, it's close to $300 million. There is no economic model that is sustainable. None. That is unviable. Let us look at my neighborhood, Barbados. Those numbers were facing Barbados 10, 15 years ago. And the government chose to ignore those numbers and continue to fool itself that it could make adjustments down the road, continuing the level of expenditure that it had. And so today, Barbados' debt to GDP is in excess of 150%, and is almost exclusively reliable on the central bank to buy its treasury notes. So in essence, we call that printing money, printing its own money. And how has the world reacted? The world has reacted where the real interest rates on bonds has now gone in excess of 10%. I'm not the most literate financially, but in principle what that means is if I have a bond that's generating a 6% interest rate, that people are discounting the bond, meaning that if I was supposed to get $100, they're discounting it by $20, and so that the yield on the bond is increasing. So the return that the investor who's buying the bond now gets in excess of 10%. One of the highest in the world. And what the sad reality is, the same decisions that confronted them 15 years ago about restructuring their debt and improving the efficiencies of their country still are on the table. They've not been able to avoid those decisions. They're still right there. The only way that they're going to be able to resolve those problems. So the former Prime Minister, Owen Arthur, when he was in his election mode, said that they had to privatize many of the statutory bodies. And everybody was in an uproar. Well, the problem is now so severe, I'm not so sure how much privatization is going to have to take place. But clearly, the choices that they have been now restricted further by the depth of their problem. And I say that to say that we are heading in the same direction. Yesterday morning I woke up, picked up the news. U.S. government has decided to cut State Department and aid by 40%. $20 billion. And that those cuts are not going to be restricted, and that will include the United Nations. How many of us have made the connection as to what's taking place in Africa? 20 million people are starving. Not hungry, starving. Thousands of people are migrating every day from Africa to Europe. Do you truly believe that the Europeans can justify continuing to give aid to this region to the extent that they are? Or is the priorities of their own crisis and the reality of their own crisis going to set in which they've got to spend more money in dealing with the situation in Africa? And if you're starting from a situation of where people are starving, that is a big hole to fill. The Middle East, is it stable? People's financial resources, people's time are being absorbed into trying to resolve the problems in the Middle East. I've talked about the problems in Barbados, the problems in Trinidad, problems in Jamaica, the problems in the rest of the Caribbean. We all have untenable situations which are going to require very difficult decisions. And those difficult decisions about how do you prioritize your resources. But I'm not daunted. I'm not daunted because you have to start with some basic things. So my perspective is, how do we establish control of our own destiny? And it's picking those things that does exactly that. There are things we do that are luxuries. There are positions we want to take, and I call them positions of enlightenment. But there are bread and butter issues that we must deal with now. Do you truly believe that a person living in a household where it's tough to put 3 square meals on the table, don't know where you're going to get the monies to send your children to school? Or do you have a loved one in your home that is sick and you have no money to help that person? What do you think is occupying those people's minds on a daily basis? I can assure you, some of the things that we're talking about don't. They're trying to just basically survive. And so therefore, it is even more important that government take these decisions. We cannot continue this long debate as to whether this is right or this is wrong. And who is going to be offended because it's changed their ability to have a job or their ability to be able to control something. We don't have that luxury anymore. We must focus on becoming more competitive. And my only problem sometimes is with these forums and using other countries or looking at the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report. I don't really care where we rank. What I compare is are we competitive? Are we driving enough investment in our country to facilitate sufficient growth to be able to fulfill basic human rights of everybody in St. Lucia? And I feel that maybe if we're motivated and we understand it from that perspective rather than a perspective of trying to see who finishes the race first, that maybe we'll get some more action. It is for us. It is not to be able to say that we rank this in the world. It doesn't mean anything. And therefore, focusing on key industries that we have and make sure that we're the most competitive in those industries. I was just saying to the minister and to my good friend Jared, every day we're forced to look at to give more and more incentives to the private sector to compensate for the inefficiencies in our system. Let me repeat that again. Every day we're being pressured to give more fiscal incentives to businesses in this country in order to compensate for the inefficiencies that we have. We're having to give incentives because we have a high electricity rate. We have to give inefficiencies because the cost of bringing goods to St. Lucia is more expensive than other places. We have to compensate for the fact that internal transportation in the country is higher than most places in the world. Land registry. Really? A half a day? For how long? That's in our control. There's no outside company or government that's putting pressure on us to tell us not to fix it. That's us. I am saying to all of us, the greatest enemy that we have is ourselves. And our fear to be able to change. Bradley showed me a comment that he made. What was it again, Bradley? The quote that you gave?
As long as you believe it's important enough, even if the odds are against you, you got to do it.
Gotta do it. So some people are saying the Prime Minister is arrogant, the Prime Minister is not listening. No, that's not true. The Prime Minister is determined to bring relief to the people who cannot help themselves. And that every single day that we stop on making a decision that is going to allow our country to be more competitive, that we can be in control of our own destiny, that we can satisfy our own needs, I will make those tough decisions. And thankful I have an incredible cabinet that supports me in those decisions. And I'm appealing to all of us. It is not easy. Stand up and be a champion. When you see those inefficiencies, stand up and cry and yell and push, because I encourage that. This is not a society in which we suppress people's ideas. But if you think something is wrong, say it is wrong. But if you're going to argue, bring your facts. Because the fact is, we do not have the resources to do all the things that we want to do at this particular moment. So we have to be able to make tough decisions and to be able to prioritize what decisions we're going to make. And that's what I'm saying to you. Don't look at this whole thing that we have to achieve all these things. What are the most critical things that we must achieve to create the greatest amount of impact on the competitiveness of our country? We bring investors here, both local and foreign. And what do we put them through? A gauntlet of things. And I have to ask the question sometimes, are we better off with that information? Alien Landlord's license. What is that? What is that? That a person coming here to buy a piece of real estate, of which, by the way, we've already approved the product to do that. So when we gave Windjammer Landing incentives, wasn't it with the understanding that the majority of people who were going to buy there were going to be foreigners? When we approved the landings, we approved Sugar Beach. So we put them through a process of things that don't even exist anymore. Police reports, fingerprinting. If a person can physically fly to St. Lucia and pass the screening of APIS, they've already met the criteria. Have we gone down to where we asked them to go and get the fingerprinting? Have you all been? You've been? Isn't it a beautiful place? Don't you think that after you come there that people are going to go, wow, this is a great place to invest? The holding cell. That's where it is, right? In the holding cell. So you're sitting there, you're selling a person a $5 million apartment. He's there with his wife and his kids because all of them got to go there and get fingerprints. And meanwhile, you have somebody who's accused of rape or somebody who is accused of murder or whatever that's right there with them. These are the things I'm speaking about. These are within our control. You must ask the question, why? Why are we doing this? By the time we get this information, are we any better off? What is it achieving? So I want to say to you all here today that my cabinet has realized it's time for change. We take the blame as much as anybody else. We're not here saying that we're better than anybody else, but we're here to say there must be a change. If we're going to make this work, we all have to be in this together. And I'm asking all of us to become champions, for all of us to take the perspective, let us take control of our own destiny, let us improve the ability for us to compete on a global basis, and let us deliver to all solutions what they so richly deserve in their lives. Thank you.